Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Wrestling with Reality podcast. We are here for another great episode. My name is Chris Kloss, and of course, joined always by Mr. Eric Malikian right here. And today we have with us, very honored, very pleased, pro wrestling legendary referee and author of The Third Man, My Life and Times Inside the Ring and Out, and the star of the current blockbuster, The Iron Claw, Mr. Jame Beard. James, welcome to the podcast. Great to see you here, my friend.
Good to be with you guys.
Thank you so much.
You bet.
Well, James, we'll kick it off here. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your history and how you broke into the wrestling business.
Oh, wow. Well, I've been around since around 86 or so. I got into the business kind of weird way. I was playing music around the Dallas area and got to know a bunch of the guys that were working there in the sportatorium and the world class and that kind of thing. And over a period of time, talking to them and getting to know them a little bit better, that, I started getting kind of, I don't know, they started asking me, about, maybe you'd be pretty good at this. You might be good piece, to work in the business. And, I toyed with it for a little while, and I finally stuck my toe in the water a little, and things just kind of started working out. I got to a point to where I had to kind of make a choice, and I was so busy with the wrestling side of things that's the direction I ended up going in.
Now, who officially broke you into the business?
Well, a lot of guys, but Bruiser Brody was really the main cog of that kind of shoved me into it more than anything else. And just kind of like I was kind of like told I was going to do it, that kind of deal. And I gave it a whirl, and it worked out. So here I am.
Well, let me ask you this. Were you officially trained? Were you taken into the ring and shown anything, or was it pretty much on the job training?
No, I was thrown in there and told, you're going to sing and swim, that kind of deal. People ask me who trained me, and a lot of, I just tell them everybody I worked with trained me, really. And everybody was around, because my training came more from listening than it did anything else. I learned more listening than I ever learned working in the ring. And it was one of those things where I just observed, and I kind of knew what was going on anyway. But I really got more of my education just by paying attention, and it turned out to be, paid off for me. I'll put it that way.
Now, what was your first official show that you worked?
Oh, God. It was probably some little podunk show. I did a few of those, along the way, and working with some of the local guys and that kind of thing, just to kind of get a feel for things. And then, just kind of graduated. Pretty soon I found myself working in the sportatorium, and everything kind of went from there. I couldn't even tell you who was on all the guys on the card on that first one, to be honest with you.
How close did you live? You grew up in basically the Dallas area?
About 90 miles east of Dallas.
Okay.
Yeah, a city called Tyler. I watched it from a kid. I mean, we would watch it on an old, had an antenna. Didn't even have cable. We'd pick up 2 or 3 of the Dallas stations if the weather was good. If it wasn't good, then it'd be kind of rough. But we watched it. I mean, back in those days, you didn't have a whole lot of choices about what to watch on TV, and that was one of those things my folks would watch. And they actually even took me to the sportatorium a couple of times when I was 8 or 9 years old, and that really kind of impressed me, I guess, in a way that always kind of piqued my interest.
That was what I was going to ask you. What was the first time you went to the sportatorium, and do you remember what the event was?
Yeah, it was just a regular TV taping.
Okay.
It was, I remember that Red Bastine, Danny McShane, Pepper Gomez, Bull Curry were on the card. Johnny Valentine probably was on the card. A lot of those guys I became friends with many years later,
Yeah.
But yeah, that was my first seeing it live and in color, and it definitely was a different experience than watching it on old black and white television.
Can you tell us a little bit about, working in and around the world-class territory? You said you started in '86, so I know you were kind of at the height of that peak and then also on the downturn of everything. What were
Yeah.
your experiences working for Fritz and the Von Erichs?
All good for me. Nothing negative to say about any of it. Fritz was always good to me. When I was around him, when I had to deal with him, it was always positive, not a problem. And the boys, I really didn't get to work with David. He died before I really got into it. I knew him before that, but I didn't get to work with him. But the other boys, Kevin and Kerry in particular, I got to be friends with and remain friends with, and still with Kevin to this day. But I was very particularly close to Kerry over the years, and just always positive for me to work with those guys. I loved them to death. Great guys.
What would you say, since you were very close to Bruiser Brody and you kind of give him credit for breaking you in, what are your thoughts on Bruiser Brody and his legacy?
Well, I guess everybody's got an opinion on Bruiser, but he was very intelligent. He knew what he wanted, knew what he needed to do to protect his own. Sorry, that's JBL trying to call me at the wrong time. I'll call him back. He was one of those guys that knew what he wanted to do in life and in the business, and he stuck to his guns. He was just he's a wonderful person as far as I'm concerned. I know that a lot of people had negative experiences with him because he could be kind of stubborn sometimes, but and he stood his ground. But he really wasn't that hard to deal with as long as you treated him fairly and as long as you did what you said you were going to do. So, I don't have anything negative to say about Bruiser whatsoever. Everything positive, as a matter of fact.
Now, were you there for the infamous match that Bruiser Brody had when Undertaker worked at the Sportatorium for the first time?
Yeah, the Undertaker worked under a hood the first time.
Right.
He was I'm trying to remember what the name, Punisher, I believe they called him, or something like that. I can't remember, but yeah,
like the Red Knight or something.
Yeah, I can't remember. Oh, you're talking about when he worked out of the hood?
Yeah.
No, with the hood.
Yeah. Yeah. Mark came there a couple of times, and one time he came as that red something red. I don't remember what it was now.
Texas Red.
Red. Yeah, and he got a kind of a rough greeting, but that's not uncommon in the business, especially in those days. That happened. Yeah. If you're a new guy, and especially if you're a big guy like that, they're gonna push you a little bit and try you and see what you can do and how you act and how you respond, and it's not all a bad situation. It's some of it's just a learning experience for guys, and some guys could take it, and some guys understood that and went on and did well, like Mark did, and some of them, it was something they couldn't handle.
Yeah.
But I don't think if you talk to Mark right now, he'd say it was a bad experience. It's probably something that he probably looks at as a growing thing.
Now, basically, during your time in world class, I know things kind of came to a halt, and it turned into the USWA when Jerry Jarrett bought into that. Yeah. Now, I was reading prior to our podcast, the story in the movie, The Iron Claw, is a little different than what actually happened. Yeah. Can you tell us actually what happened at the end of world class and how Jerry Jarrett came in and how it became the USWA?
Well, things were kind of going downhill a little bit. We'd had so many things that's happened that were negative. With David dying and Kerry's accident and Gino dying and some issues with with some of the other guys, Bruiser dying, and then, I mean, so many negative things, and I think that really affected the perception of the promotion, and attendance was down. Things weren't going very well, and they gave Eric Embry the book, and Eric really brought it back around. He kind of put it all on his own shoulders, and he was, he was booking it the way he had to book it because he didn't have a whole lot to work with, to be honest with you. And he was doing very well. He brought fans back into the building, and along that same time, Jarrett showed interest in buying the promotion, and he made a deal with Kevin and Fritz, and he came in and brought a whole new crew of guys in, and a lot of things changed for a while, and then there was a dispute about how some things were handled money wise and that kind of thing, and that blew up, and then Kevin tried to restart World Class, but he had lost TV, and it just there was no way it was going to come back. And from there, it went, a couple of months later, Global started. But it was when USWA came in, it was kind of a fresh thing for people. It was new, and I think it was catching on. And Jerry Jarrett was, he told me many years later that was his favorite time in the business. I thought it would probably be a negative thing for him, but he didn't feel that way. He enjoyed it, and I think he was disappointed he didn't get to carry it all the way through because of the issues they had. But they were doing some good things, and that was one of those. They hung on in Memphis for a lot longer than anybody else did.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And I think he had visions of doing the same thing in Dallas.
Well, you guys were on ESPN with the USWA for at least
USWA was on ESPN, and later on Global picked it up, and they did the same thing. It was kind of crazy. I still hear today from guys who were that age, when they were teenagers back in the early 90s or something, and they talk about how they watched us on TV in the afternoons, and it's amazing how big of an effect that had, actually.
Absolutely.
I mean it was national exposure,
Yeah, it was amazing. I didn't really realize what we were doing at the time, because for one thing, a lot of us that were there, Eddie Gilbert was one of the bookers at the time, and I was working very closely with Eddie in that case, and he was really he was upset a lot of times because they edited our program to a point to where a lot of the things that we did and showed to our local TVs and the syndicated TVs, ESPN had cut up, and took a lot of things out of it, mostly because of the time frame, I think, or the period that they had it showing, like in the afternoons. And so a lot of things that we were doing, they didn't make their TV, and so we weren't that crazy about it, And then later on, I find out just how much of an effect it had, and how much of an outreach it had. I remember working. I was in Japan, and Barry Darsov came over. I was working with a company that had an agreement with WWF at the time, and Barry Darsov came over, and he said, "Man, I was just watching you on TV. I was in London, and I was like, wow, and that's when I realized just what kind of an outreach it had. It's kind of crazy."
Yeah.
Go for it, Chris. You got anything?
Oh, no, go right ahead.
But I do want to talk about Global, and I do want to talk about Eddie Gilbert. But before we jump to that, tell us a little bit more about the USWA Dallas time. I know one of the biggest things to come out of there was the start of Stone Cold Steve Austin's career. Big feud he had with Chris Adams that got a lot of press.
Right. Yeah. Chris had started a training school, and I don't know, he had probably 15 or 20 guys that he was training at the time. And you got to think, back in those days, training schools really weren't common. That was an unusual situation. And usually if you wanted to get in the wrestling business, you either had to know somebody or find somebody that trained you or something like that. There weren't that many formal schools. And that was kind of a new concept.
Yeah.
So Chris started doing that. And of course, Steve was one of the guys that that signed up with him. He was a football player at North Texas State at the time, and he just had a natural feel for things. You could tell right off that he was one of those guys that had a chance to make it. You know, he paid attention. He watched tapes. I don't tell him how many times he came over to my house watching. He just all he wanted to do is watch tapes, you know, and learn. And that's the kind of guy he was. And you knew he was going to probably make it if anybody was. And he was a guy that broke out of that school. I mean, several of the guys ended up working locally and doing some things, you know, on a certain level. But Steve was the guy that kind of had the it factor, and you could tell it. You know, even when he was really green and making mistakes in the ring, you could tell. You know, he was the guy that was going to go on.
Were you surprised to the level that he took off? Because, I mean, let's be honest, next to Hulk Hogan, he's probably the biggest star ever in professional wrestling.
Yeah, I would say maybe even bigger than Hogan in a lot of ways. He basically won the war for him in the 90s, you know, and I'm talking about with WCW.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, of course, you don't know that a guy's going to go to that level. I mean, you can tell when a guy's going to be successful. And I've been pretty lucky with that, you know, when I've worked with certain guys and tried to help them along, that most of them have done pretty well. And I knew Steve was going to do well, but just because of how dedicated he was. And he was just determined. But to reach that level of things, that's something that's you can't predict. You know, you got to have a lot of things happen the right way, and a lot of things that go your way for that to happen. And you know, when you think back on it, he was kind of the darling of the smart crowd when he first started. He was a technical guy. You know, he was a great wrestler. And he was envisioning himself as being that, and he thought he was going to be able to take over for Ric Flair in the WCW. That was something they actually promised him, and he was very disappointed and very upset when they kind of went some other directions with that, and you know, of course, he got out of his contract there and went to ECW for a little while, and he wasn't really happy at first in WWF, you know, the gimmick he had there, and then of course it's kind of one of those fateful things, you know. The right thing happened. He said the right thing at the right time, and had a great match with Bret Hart that got him over, and there you go. You know, he had the talent and the gift of gab to make it work, and you know, working to that extent is hard to predict, but he did it.
Tell us a bit, you know, because a lot of people don't talk about gentleman Chris Adams anymore. As you alluded to earlier about the dying days of world class, you know, the unfortunate passing of Gino Hernandez. Him and Gino Hernandez talking about Chris Adams were a pretty big deal in the Dallas area.
Yeah.
And you know, until recently, Steve Austin putting over Chris Adams, I don't think a lot of people give him his just due. Tell us a bit about Chris Adams and his life and legacy.
Yeah, I knew Chris really, really well. In fact, we traveled together a lot, and later on, we promoted a few shows together, and I spent a lot of time with Chris, and so I knew him really, really well. He was a complex guy. One of the most talented wrestlers I've ever been in the ring with. I mean, he's one of those guys that you can put in there with anybody and he's going to have a good match. I can't remember him ever having a bad match. He's that good. But he also had some demons that he had to deal with, and that was his downfall. Really, that was the problem, you know, and probably why he didn't make it any further than he did when he had a couple of other opportunities. But Chris was ultra talented, incredibly talented, and he was a good teacher. He was a judo champion. I mean, he was a junior world champion at one time in England, and definitely good enough to be on an Olympic team. But he taught wrestling in that way a lot. He used a lot of judo in his teachings, and he was just an incredible guy in a lot of ways. He just had a couple of faults that really hurt him, and it ultimately probably caused his death.
Now, you alluded to after, the USWA kind of severed off its ties in the Dallas area, the Sportatorium. Basically, the Global Wrestling Federation, and Joe Pedicino came in, took the ESPN spot, and also took over the Sportatorium shows. Can you tell us how all that came about and memories of Eddie Gilbert booking there?
Well, all my memories of Eddie Gilbert are all positive. I can't think of anybody I enjoyed working with any more than Eddie. He's so smart, so talented in the ring, just an incredible guy. He considered me part of his. He had that family thing. He kind of considered me part of that, and I was proud to be that. He was just a great guy, super guy. And so smart, man. He came up with so many great ideas. I can't say enough about him. As far as global goes, when it first came in, by that time I was already working in Japan a lot, so I was gone. I'd be gone sometimes 6 or 8 weeks at a time, and come in and out and in and out. I remember it had been, I don't know, maybe a month since Kevin had kind of given up on the idea of restarting World Class. And that was after USWA. He ran a bunch of house shows and that kind of thing, but no TV. So it was kind of a futile effort. But maybe about a month after that, I was home and I got a call from Skandar Akbar, and he said, we got a new group coming in here, and they want you to work with them. And I said, well, yeah, I mean, absolutely. Anytime somebody comes to the Sportatorium, that's my home. I want to be there if I can be there as much as I can. And that's what he was talking about with Joe Pedicino and that group. And it was interesting, that we would take 15, 16, 17 matches a night, at the Sportatorium, or the Global Dome as they were calling it. But I really enjoyed that part because I got to work with a lot of different guys and a lot of really talented guys. And Joe had some great ideas. I mean, he was a little different from a lot of promoters in that he kind of wanted to recognize that we're not the only ones in the world, that there's other wrestling out there, and he would talk about it. And in fact, that was part of how he got into it. He had a program where he kind of did a news deal about wrestling in different areas and that sort of thing. And he incorporated that into the global, and brought guys in from everywhere. Some young guys that were just starting out that had potential, and some veterans that were definitely top notch. And then if you look at the list of the guys that came in there, it's pretty incredible, really. But like I said, I was in and out a lot, and they kind of used that a little bit because they made it sound like I was in Japan working, representing global in Japan, which wasn't true, but it worked over here for TV, and so it was a good situation for me. I could come right back home, and when I was there, I just stepped right back into my place, and I thank Skandar Akbar for that a lot of times, but. It was a lot of fun, and then of course the money, the money that we thought was there, it wasn't there. At least that's the story I get, and there was supposed to be some multi-millionaire behind the whole thing, and evidently that didn't pan out to be as true as Joe was hoping it was, and that went to a kind of a abrupt halt. And, then another month or two later, Act called me again. He said, well, we're going to start back up, and so Global's second entity started, with a whole different, I guess, concept, because that kind of money wasn't there. We had to use a lot more local guys and be a little bit more frugal about who we brought in and that kind of thing. But still, if you look at the guys that got started in Global and the guys that came through Global, there's a lot to be proud of. It was an alternative, really. It was different from some of the other things that was going on, and WWF at the time was very different, and And global gave somebody something else to look at, and I thought I'm pretty proud of all that time, really.
Now,
I
during this
remember,
time,
I remember. Oh, sorry. I remember
no,
seeing. I remember exactly what you're talking about with Pedicino. Talking about the news of the day with other promotions, and
Yeah,
even at the time, as a young kid watching that, it was like, whoa, that really got your attention because
yeah.
you never heard that, and I think you could credit him for kind of changing the scope of the entire landscape,
Yeah,
which led into other leagues, like when the war was going on. They talked. So I felt like he kind of planted the seed with all of that on a as far as you had your Meltzer newsletters and all that,
yeah.
but you definitely from the scope of you're seeing this, but on a wrestling television show. I think that there was some credit to be said for him planting the seeds to change the landscape a little bit there as a
Well,
whole.
it was kind of refreshing, actually, to
Mm-hmm.
see it something different, instead
Yeah.
of the same old guard type attitudes that a lot of promotion had during that time. And Joe had a lot of great ideas. I mean, I think if he really had the kind of money behind him that he thought he had, there's no telling what that would have done. I
Yeah.
mean, it was a viable alternative to WWF and WCW at the time.
Right.
Uh, Very different, a little bit more traditional in the way the wrestling went, but at the same time it was progressive. So it was an interesting concept, and I enjoyed that little bit of time that we had doing that.
Now, me and Chris are gonna shoot fire a few names during the global days. Like you're
Okay.
talking about, a lot of guys got their
Okay.
start there, and went on to do big things in other places. I'll start off with Marcus Buff Bagwell.
Yeah, yeah. The handsome stranger, I believe, is the gimmick he had. Wore a little Lone Ranger mask or whatever. Yeah, yeah. Marcus was you could tell he was a talented guy. He had obviously had the look. I don't know why they wanted to cover up his face, but that was just part of the gimmick, I guess. But yeah, Mark was one of those guys who were very green at the time, but but you could tell, he was one of those guys that had a chance to do something with his career, and he did. I mean, there's been some negative things about Marcus here and there, but I've never had a bad experience with him, period. And uh, always been good, always been very, very nice with me and easy to work with. And I think he's done very well for himself. He's still out there doing a few things, I think.
How about the guy who I thought just on looks alone would probably make it, and he got in there for a little while in the WWF was Conan Chris Walker.
Yeah. Yeah, that was kind of a surprise that Chris didn't get more of a chance to do
Right.
what he did. Had a great look. He was very athletic. Obviously, another one of those guys who was very green and needed some maturing and needed a little I guess a little help in learning how to put things together. But at the time, if you think about the times in WWF, he had that kind of look that would fit right in. And I'm a little surprised he didn't get a little bit better push there. But he was a nice guy, very, very nice guy. Another guy that was easy to work with and never had a problem with him.
And you think he probably, I know he was there in early 92 and working the house shows for WWF, but you think he just kind of jumped a little too soon?
Possibly. Yeah, it possibly, in those days they didn't have anything, NXT or something that they could take him to and let him mature a little bit and get a little green off of him. But, and you got to remember too, in those days, WWF had the cream of the crop from the territories, the top guys that could work their asses off, I mean, it was you get thrown in there with those guys and you're going to get ate up if you don't know what you're doing. And he was one of those guys who was just awfully green and probably, it may have had a negative impact on his psyche a little bit, having to deal with that kind of talent. I don't know that. I'm just,
Yeah,
surmising.
for sure. What about Chaz and Stephen Dane? And I want to say those were the two guys that did that the crane match, right? Where they were were you
Oh, God.
were you right there?
Oh, God, yes, I was there.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but that was kind of, was that the end kind of toward the end of Global and
getting close to that. Yeah.
Okay.
That was a Gray Pearson idea. Gray Pearson's the guy that took over Global after Jay Pedicino left. He's a lawyer in the Dallas area, and he took over as the promoter. And Gray was a good guy, but he had some crazy ideas. Akbar and I shook our heads a lot of times when we would hear those things, but he came up with that bungee cord or bungee match idea, and I told he wanted me to go up in the deal and referee it, and I told him, I said, Gray, there's no way I'm getting up there and doing it. First of all, you can't have a decent match in that little thing, and the other thing is I don't like heights, and I told him, look, the first thing that's going to happen is there's going to be a technical issue. There's no way this is going to happen without a technical issue. And sure enough, before they even got the thing up in the air, the camera inside the little cage thing went off. And Akbar and I looked at each other, and we went in the dressing room and watched it on the monitor. I didn't want to have anything to do with it. But, I mean, it's one of those things that's kind of infamous, and then so we're still talking about it all these years later. So I guess in some ways it was successful.
Where did they film that? Was that right outside?
It's right outside. Yeah, right outside the Sportatorium. Yeah, right in the parking lot.
Okay.
Yeah, and Mike Davis caught his moon rock that day.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, but you're asking about those guys. Steve Dane was actually Steve Casey. He that's not his real name. We're still Steve Sasser was his real name, but Steve Casey is what he worked as before in the territory days. He was Scott Casey's working brother, and in fact Scott trained him, if I understand right, and. So he had that kind of gimmick back in those days, and then eventually he changed it to Steve. Well, I'm getting all mixed up. Steve Casey and then Stephen Dane is the next name he used. But he was a good guy. He's one of those guys that had a great body and kind of a guy that you could work up and down the lineup a little bit. I don't think Steve was ever going to be a superstar or anything like that, but he was a serviceable type worker, and a good baby face. And of course, he was working heel there during that period of time, but he was a good baby, kind of little white meat baby face we had around for a long time, and did a good job. Chaz was a young guy that his dad trained. Tugboat Taylor was his dad, and he was just starting really during those Global years, and he got a little bit of exposure working with Jerry Lynn and Sean Waltman. He became X-Pac later on, and those guys were phenomenal. They were doing things that nobody was doing at the time. And Chaz got a little bit of a rub from that, and he was he was another one of those guys that was very athletic and did a lot of good things and had a pretty nice little run there.
I'm going to throw out three more names: Scott Anthony, also known as Raven, JBL, and Booker T. Okay.
Well, Scott he had a lot of success up in the Northwest before he came down here. Scotty the Body, I think, is what they were calling him. Yeah. I always enjoyed working with Scott and always enjoyed being around him. He was a great guy, very talented. The Raven character doesn't really show the kind of skills he had so much after he got into the hardcore stuff, but I always enjoyed working with him. Great talker, super talker, and just a good guy. I had a lot of fun with Scott. And who was Booker T? Oh yeah, Booker's he's one of my best friends. A great guy, super guy. So proud of everything he's accomplished. He's he's one of those guys that when the first time I saw him, I knew he was going to do something. He just no doubt about it. He's so athletic, had the look, had the right attitude. I can't say enough about Booker T. He's just a wonderful guy. He's still doing a lot of good things. He's got a promotion and training center down there in South Texas, and he's got a nice facility that he's shooting some local TV with, and still teaching, and just an incredible guy. I can't say enough about him. And Stevie Ray too. Stevie was a good guy too. Great guys.
Mm-hmm.
Good friends to this day.
I can concur. I met them when they first got into WCW, and I couldn't say it couldn't have been nicer.
Yeah. No, he was. I'm just really proud of how those guys went up and did what they did, and became, I think, one of the great tag teams of all time, really.
Yeah.
And Booker T as a singles, I mean, just look at the resume. I mean, man, he's done it all. Super guy.
And last one, JBL.
I knew that was coming. That was who was trying to call me just a couple of minutes ago. My probably as close a friend as I have in the business. I can't tell you how proud I am of everything he's accomplished. I know that there were some times when he had some controversy around him here and there, but he was always the same guy. If you knew him well enough, you knew a lot of that stuff was a bunch of crap. And probably just doing his job, but just incredibly smart guy for one thing, and another one of those guys who, the first time I saw him, first time I met him, I knew he was going to do well, because he was always wanting to learn, always wanting to train, never hard to work with. I actually, and he's told the story when he was inducted in the Hall of Fame, and we've told it before, but I actually was there the day he showed up at the Sportatorium looking for a job, and he knocked on the door. I answered the door, and there he was, and we just happened to have an opening that night, and we threw him in there, and he did what he was supposed to do, and we became fast friends from that moment on, and we still are to this day.
Now, you talked about how you were popping back and forth between Texas and Japan. Tell us a little bit about everything you've done in Japan. And I know you were alluding to us as well that you worked in Japan when the WWF had a working relationship with a promotion out there. Yeah.
Kendo Nagasaki, Kazu Sakurada is his real name, but you probably knew him as Kendo Nagasaki as a wrestler. But he's the guy that took me over there the first time. And I thought when I went, this is just going to be a one-shot opportunity. And so I went over there and had two shows in Yokohama at the same building 2 nights in a row. And they had about 18,000 people both nights. And things worked out really well for me. And when I was getting ready to leave the second night, the Kabuki, who was one of the bookers, doing the payoffs and that kind of thing, and then he said, "Okay, you come back next month." I went, "Oh, okay." And from that point on, I was a permanent member of the crew, and it was, as far as I know, I'm the only foreign referee that's ever actually worked for a Japanese company as far as being part of the crew. I know guys have gone over there and done tours and shows and that kind of thing, but as far as actually being part of the company, as far as I know, I'm the only one that's ever done that. And that was that. They ended up. It was originally supposed to be a strong style company, and they were bringing guys over from different places, Canada, Britain, United States, that fit that style. And somewhere down the line, Tenyu, who was the head guy in the company, or the main star in the company, ended up making a deal with Vince to bring in WWF guys every tour. and so that was something that lasted for a while, and it actually caused some issues within the company, because a lot of the guys, the older established guys that started the company, weren't happy with that, because they didn't think it fit the strong style that they intended for it to be. So it ended up causing the company to split. But before that happened, I was in a pretty good situation. I was getting to work with all the top guys in WWF and all the top Japanese guys at the same time. So for me, it was a fun deal. But when the company split, Sakurada took a group which was funded by the same guy, and of course I was being loyal to him. I went with him, and it actually ended up helping me a lot, because he gave me a lot of latitude booking guys and booking matches, and then booking period for that matter, and then that carried over to the States, and it's amazing how working in Japan was such a big deal back then. And that really kind of made my career, to be honest with you. It put me in a whole different situation, even over here. So it was good for me, and I worked over there for about 7 years off and on, and it was the greatest experience of my life working over there. And I would go over and work a tour, stay over and work in the training center, then do another tour, and then come home and work here, and then I'd go back and do that same thing again. So it was good for me, especially in that time period, because things in the business weren't great. A lot of the territories were dying, and jobs over here, a lot of guys were dropping out and not working, working weekends and that kind of thing, and that kept me in the business. So it was a great situation for me.
Now, how often were you going back and forth between the States and Japan at that time?
Oh, I was going, like I said, I'd go over, spend a couple of weeks on a tour. Then I'd spend whatever time was in between that time and the next tour, which might be anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks over there. And then I'd do another tour. So I'd be there 6, 8 or more weeks at a time. And then I'd come home, and I might be home probably the longest I would ever be at home was a month. Most of the time I'd be home 2 or 3 weeks, and I'm back over there again. But it just that was the routine over and over again, and I loved it. It was great for me.
And they wanted you over there. It was a kind of a translation thing. Like you think about announcers or referees, today flying themselves out to get booked and all that, but you were part of, in the sense that they wanted maybe an American guy to work with the American athletes.
Well, I thought that at first, and that's kind of what I was expecting when I got over there. But the truth is I probably worked as much or maybe more Japanese matches than I did American. In wrestling, the wrestling terms are basically English for the most part, and in Japan, if you don't know, if they don't have a word that fits something, they'll just make it up in English usually. There's Tim Storm tells a story. I told him about it one time when we were on one of our trips, and on my second trip to Japan, they took me into the training center, and they told me, we want you to write down every wrestling term you think of, from moves, holds, parts of the rings, everything. Anything you can think of, write it down. And I spent several days doing that. I couldn't believe how much stuff was there, And they created a book they used for training out of that. So that was one of the first things they did with me over there. But they were training a lot of young guys, and I would get in the ring and I'd try to tell them this is this and that's that, and so I'd start showing them things, and that got me into training guys. So all that stuff kind of led me into all kinds of different aspects of the business, working over there, and it was something that I really wanted to do. I wanted to be involved in the creative side from the beginning, and the training thing just kind of fell into place with all that. But Yeah, I thought I'd be working. I thought I'd be working all the American matches too, but as it turns out, they were pretty indiscriminate about it where they put me. I'd be, I'd be in a all Japanese match sometimes, and sometimes it'd be a mixed match, and you just never knew. And I like that because that didn't make me I guess a specialty guy. It made me just one of the guys, and that's how they used me. And it was a great experience for me.
Now, after this time, you spent the final days of the Memphis territory, my bad, in the USWA. Can you tell us about how all that came about and how the fall apart came with that whole situation?
Yeah, actually WWFE, I don't know if it was F or E at the time, it was 96, 95, 96, something like that. Anyway, they actually sent me to USWA. They had an agreement with them. They were working talent exchange type thing. And I was sent there to help with the creative side and trying to help with some of the getting some of the house shows on good footing and that kind of thing. They had a guy there by the name of Larry something who Jerry Lawler had brought in. And this guy he's supposedly a movie Hollywood guy and all this stuff. Well, it turns out he was nothing more than a fraud. And when I went in there, on TV they made me the matchmaker. That was just a TV role. I was helping Dutch with the booking, but he was the main booker, and on TV I was the matchmaker. So I was kind of the figurehead guy. But this guy, Larry Burton is the name. At least that's one of the names he had, as it turned out. He was the most destructive guy I've ever been around in my life. Just a fraud and a liar. As it turns out, he had been convicted of fraud in California a couple of times. And he was really just causing a lot of issues there at USWA. And they had cooked the books and sold the company to a group out of Cleveland, out of Ohio, who thought that these things were all true that they were telling them, or that this guy was telling them. He had gone to Jerry Jarrett and offered Jerry Jarrett a certain amount of money for the company. And then he turned around and sold it for considerably more than that. There's a couple $1 million involved, I think. And as it turns out, this new group that came in, this guy kept trying to keep me away from him. He didn't want me to get near him. Well, he ended up going to California for a couple of weeks, saying that he had sponsorship coming in and all that kind of thing, which was all a lie. But anyway, he took off, and the guys that had bought the company, they were trying to put together promotion packages and that kind of thing, and changing a few things here and there, and they called me into the office where I was supposed to have been to begin with, and started asking me a bunch of questions, and as it turns out, they didn't even know who Jerry Jarrett was. They bought the company and didn't even know who Jerry Jarrett was. And I couldn't believe that. I was like, wow. And they were already suspecting that some of the things that they were told and when they bought it weren't true. And they started doing some investigating, and they asked me to introduce them to Jerry Jarrett, which I ended up going to Nashville and doing. And from there, it turned into a real cluster. They got a lawsuit started, and it got really nasty. They weren't sure if this guy was connected somehow. I had a federal agent follow me around for 2 or 3 weeks. They didn't know. They just didn't know. It turned out he was just a supreme jerk. But when they were doing the investigation, they were just being careful and wanted to make sure. But it ended up in a big federal trial, and he was convicted of RICO and fraud. He and his son was involved in it somehow or the other. I don't know exactly how that all came about. But it was a nasty, horrible experience, and I, it's a shame too, because it hurt a lot of people, hurt a lot of the guys that were working there, and brought down a promotion that was hanging on, that hung on, that when a lot of other promotions couldn't do it. And I'll blame it all on one guy. It makes me mad when I think about it now.
Now, do you know whatever happened to all the Memphis footage? Because I know there's a lot of talk that it's kind of scattered around because Vince doesn't even own it.
Yeah, when all this stuff came down, it was scattered. There was a little bit there in Memphis that we had access to. My understanding is Jerry Jarrett had some, and there was some other footage somewhere else, and I don't know if it was the TV station or I don't know. I know it all wasn't in one place, and I think to this day there's still some argument and maybe even some legal wrangling going on about that, and that's been 20 something years ago. It's just, I don't know what happened to all of it, but it's a shame because there was a lot of good stuff. I mean, the little bit that we had was incredible, interesting. You go back and watch the Jackie Fargo and all, and the Fabulous Ones and all those guys. And we tried to put together some shows in the studio for a few weeks after the lawsuit all came down, but we couldn't sustain that because they wanted live wrestling, and we thought, this is going to be over in a couple of weeks and we'll be able to get back to it, but it never did. So it turned into that lawsuit, and it was a mess. It was a real mess.
And then I know a few years later you had a tryout with the WWE back in the mid 2000s.
Well,
can you tell us a bit about that experience?
Well, it wasn't really a
tryout. You didn't accept the job?
Yeah, it was a job. There's all kinds of stuff out there about that's not right. The truth is, I got a call from John Layfield one day, and he had just gotten back from flying somewhere with Vince and Michael Hayes, and somehow the subject of referees came up, and they were having a lot of guys that they wanted some guys that had some experience and could kind of help guide some guys on the ring and that kind of thing. And somewhere in that process, my name came up, and Vince asked him, he said, "Well, why aren't you working for us?" And John said, "Well, he probably didn't want to." And at the time, and I really didn't. I never did have a desire to work for him. But he called and asked me if I'd be interested in coming in for a TV and talking to him. And I said, "Yeah, well, I'll come in," and always willing to talk. And I came in and I did Raw and I did SmackDown and they were doing ECW at the time, so I did that too. I was unhappy the whole time I was there. I was very disappointed in the way the things were going in the locker room. It was just, it's not the same as it used to be. It was like everybody was walking on eggshells. It was just a bad vibe for me. And even before I got in the ring the first night, I was sitting there thinking, what in the hell are you doing here? It's just not going to be something I'm going to want to do. But anyway, I went through the whole weekend and did all the shows and everything. And at the end, they asked me if I wanted to sign a contract. And I said, no, just send my money to this address. And when I got back, there were some things on the internet that came up, that this, that, and the other. And I wish it hadn't come up that way, but it did. But the truth is the job was mine if I wanted it. I just didn't want it. And I wasn't going to take it. I mean, it was it wasn't going to make as much money as I was making at home. I'd started an appraisal business several years before that, and I would have had to either given that up or figured out a way to work with it somehow. And I wasn't wanting to go back on the road for one thing, and I never had a desire to work for WWE. It just wasn't my cup of tea. I mean, I love those guys. A lot of guys up there I love. Have a lot of respect for them, but my style was not that. My style was working and not performing, and that's what it had gotten to, and I just wasn't interested in it. So that's the truth about the whole thing. You know, there's a lot of things out there, but that's exactly what happened.
You know, I hold you in high regard as, you know, I was a referee for over 15 years. I hold you in high regard like I do, you know, Tommy Young, Mike Chioda, and many other referees from over the years. What do you think is lost in the art of being a professional wrestling referee today?
I think just the thing I talked about before, it's not a work anymore. It's a performance, and the referee. You know, when I do clinics and things, I tell guys, I said, a referee's part of is a worker, just like the wrestlers is. It's not. He doesn't have the same role. He's got a different role. He's got a different job, but he's a worker. Mm-hmm. And if he's doing his job right in the right situation, he's enhancing the matches, trying to get over. He's kind of the narrator in the ring, the guy that's trying to tell the crowd this hole is having an effect. This is what's going on with body language and facial expressions, sometimes vocally. There's a lot of things involved in refereeing that helps enhance a match. And plus the fact that if you don't have rules that are consistent, then it's kind of hard to be that, you know, and the last several years, most places don't have any, the fans couldn't even tell you what the rules are. You know, and they change from one match to the next, and then one match they mean something, the next match they don't mean anything, and that's just totally opposite of the way things were when I was coming up in the business and when I enjoyed working in it, because that was my role. I was the guy that portrayed the guy who was holding up to the rules, and as you know, if you as a referee, there's a lot of ways you can do that. You know, and sometimes it's a very subtle thing, and sometimes it's very obvious, but it's always there, and it's always part of the perception of the match that there are rules here that a guy is supposed to be following, and if he's not, he's getting around you somehow, and you're allowing him to get around you somehow without making it look like you're allowing him to do that. A lot of tricks involved, you know, and so many little subtle things that you can do to make matches better. And these days, basically a referee's just in there to make sure he's in the right place at the right time and make the count at the right time. He's not really a part of the work. Not I mean, yeah, guys have facial expressions and they jump and they, you know, they I see a lot of guys using a lot of hand gestures and that kind of thing. But it's a different feel, a different role now than it used to be, and it wouldn't be very enjoyable to me to be doing it that way. I always wanted to walk out of a match feeling like I contributed something, and that we got out of it what we intended to, and that's hard to do when you're not really a part of the program, when you're not part of the pre-planning. It's a shame as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. Now, do you think? Oh, go ahead, Chris.
No, I was just going to say, you know, wrestling is supposed to be a pseudo competition. It's supposed to appear like a competition,
right?
You know, whether it is, whether you believe it or not. And I don't care whether fans know or not. It doesn't make any difference. If you do it the right way and you believe in what you're doing and you do it in a way that shows you're believing in it, then they're going to buy into it. I don't care what they know. I don't care how smart they are. Yeah. And they don't even allow them that opportunity these days. And that's a shame.
It at one time, I mean, it in its core, as far as I'm concerned, as a kid, being introduced to it, it was always presented to you as a sport.
Yes.
That's what it was, a sport of professional wrestling. So you have that as your foundation. And now everything else is going to make sense from that. But I think I completely agree, James, is that foundation in itself has been kind of chipped away at and lost over the years. And, you know, you're told that this is a performance, all the while it's in its core, it's to be presented as sport. So, hey, look, ESPN, Total Sports Network.
And I can tell you this, and I believe this 100%, this is one of the main reasons why the business, the wrestling product, has not grown in the last several years. If you look at the numbers on AEW and WWE, they're flat. They've gotten to a certain point, and that's all they've got. They have a market of smart marks,
Right.
and that's about it. They're not growing the fans that want to go and watch a match and care and feel something. If you go in there and make them care about what's going on and make them really want to know what's happening next, then you're going to grow a market. But if you're just going in there to please a bunch of guys who want to see a guy jump up and down and fly around the ring, that doesn't make any sense. You're going to pretty well stay where you are, and that's what they've done for the last several years. If you look at it, that's just a fact.
almost 20-ish years. Almost.
Yeah, that's not some old timer who's got who's jaded and hates what's going on today. That's just a fact. And they're never going to get any better than that unless they revert back to some believability.
Yeah, I agree with that statement about, like, say that you've been in there. It's an old timer talking, because, I mean, I remember back in the 80s, friends of mine and my parents, my dad and my friend's dad, and they grew up in that time, but they weren't talking about the product the way we are now, because it was still based that way in the 80s from it was the 60s and the 50s.
Look, I still work. I've got a promotion in Texas that I work with called Texas Style Wrestling, and we're trying to get to where the name of that really is what we're doing. And I work with a teaching promotion in Louisiana, and a few other promotions here and there. I do a few things with, and everywhere I go, we present it in a way to where we believe in what we're doing. Yeah. And the fans believe in what we're doing. So I see it. I see evidence of it everywhere I go, that the fans want that kind of product. And if you present that kind of product consistently, I believe there's a fan base out there that'll grow. Mm-hmm. It's just got to be consistent, and it's got to be done that way without making a joke of it, without laughing at looking at the camera and laughing, and winking at it. You've got to take yourself seriously, and the way things are presented these days, a lot of guys can do more athletic things than ever before. There's no question about that. The problem is when you get through with it, what have you got, and what story are you telling? Or do the fans who watch it really understand anything other than just having a reaction to a incredible athletic stunt? If in the end, if you're not telling them something that they want to really invest their emotions into, then what's the point?
Yeah,
absolutely. I completely agree.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what? I don't want to take too much time talking about this, but that's the reason why I got out of it. A lot of the guys that are now stars, whether it's in WWE or AEW, I've worked with a lot of those guys, and I felt like I was just there to watch their gymnastics performance. Yeah. Like you said, just be there for the finish, and that's it.
And it's such a shame, because a guy who really understands the referee role in a situation where they're really working and really trying to develop a match that makes sense and has those ebbs and flows in it, and a finish that really hooks people. If you're a referee working in that kind of situation and insisting in that, it's so much fun. It's just so enjoyable, and so much pleasure and satisfaction in getting that kind of result. And you can be such a big benefit to those guys trying to do that as a referee, if they'll just work with you, if they'll understand how to work with you. And I don't see that. Mm-hmm. I don't see them understanding that, and the guys that I worked with back in the day that understood how to work with me got more heat than ever, just because I allowed that. Without putting heat on myself, I allowed them to get around me in a way, or I reacted to them in a way that got heat for them. Black Bart, my old buddy, God bless him. He's fighting cancer right now, and we're all praying for him. But he just wrote a book and just released it, and there's a chapter in there, and he talks about how he and I would get nose to nose, and that created so much heat that the fans were buying into it, and they believed in it. And you just don't see that anymore.
Yeah.
Because they believed in my authority, but they also believed in him being an asshole.
Yes.
And it's just a shame that it's not that way. And I'm sorry you weren't able to experience that and stick around and have that kind of relationship with the wrestlers. I'm blessed that I got to do that. I really am.
Yeah, and you were one of those guys that truly showed your authority. I know when you did that week with the WWE, I remember seeing you on TV, and you actually got in there with the guys. You pulled them out of the corner, and you did stuff that I grew up watching that a referee did and was supposed to.
When I walked, it was kind of funny because I did that when I did Raw. They had the what were the cheerleader guys' names?
Spirit Squad.
Yeah, Spirit Squad. Yeah. There was a single match between one of them and one of the guys who was like one of the Highlanders or something like that. I can't remember, but anyway, it was a singles match. And of course, all the Spirit Squad were out there around the ring doing their thing and all that kind of stuff. Ricky Steamboat was the agent, and he gave me a spot in the match, because none of these guys knew me, and when they were going over it before the matches, that Ricky gave it to me, and I said, "Yeah, not a problem. I'll do what you asked, and they keep coming over. Have you got this? Have you got this? Have you got? I said, man, just do what you're supposed to do, and I'll be there. Don't worry about it, And we did, and it ended up me kicking them out of the building, some kind of deal where the spot where I caught them doing something, and they tried to use that megaphone thing, and I caught it and threw them out of the building and all that kind of stuff. And they couldn't believe that they gave somebody that kind of a spot that had never been there before, And I said, well, Ricky knew, and when I walked back to the curtains, the gorilla position, Vince was sitting there, John was standing there, and he said, well, I don't think you've lost anything. And I said, like riding a bike, and they appreciated that. Even Vince appreciated that, but yet you get what you get. Sad.
Well, that's why, too, a lot of, like Chris alluded to earlier, a lot of referees and a lot of guys are flying themselves across the country or overseas. It's because that art's lost. Like guys like you that knew how to do it and learned from guys that came before you, it's just not there anymore, in my opinion.
No, it's a shame. You can't, and they're not teaching that. That's a shame too. They teach guys all the athletic stuff, that all the moves, and all the spots, and all that stuff, and they can do those things. But what they don't do is they don't learn how to develop a match. They don't learn how to put all that stuff together to make sense. And it's sad, really, and that's one of the things I keep preaching and keep trying to teach the guys I'm working with and trying to get to with the promotions I'm working with is that all of our matches need to make sense. You don't have to impress me with all the stuff that you can do in the ring. I already know you can do them. Make me feel something. Don't make me react. Make me feel, and that's what I'm looking for.
I completely agree. I know we're wrapping up. It's almost over an hour here, and we don't want to take up too much of your time. We truly appreciate you coming on here.
My pleasure.
We give you, your plugs. We want you to plug your book and everything you got going on. But the one last thing we'd like to discuss is the movie The Iron Claw, which you had a few scenes in. Tell us about your experiences with that, how it all came about, and basically your view on the movie after being out in the theater, if you saw it.
Yeah, I was traveling one day, and I got a call from Tim Storm, which wasn't unusual. Tim and I are he and John Lafer are probably the two guys I'm closest to in this business, and so Tim had talked to Luke Hawks, who had been involved in several movies and TV shows and that sort of thing, and he was involved in the casting of the movie. And Luke had asked him if I would be interested in being a part of it. And I said, well, yeah, tell Luke to call me. I've known him a long time. He did, and kind of gave me a little idea of what they wanted. They wanted somebody there that kind of represented the real thing, I guess, and kind of how he put it. And I said, sure, I'd be more than happy to do that. And the next thing I know, I'm getting vetted by A24, the movie company. And you have to go. It's almost like trying to get into some kind of secret society or something to get vetted by them and SAG and all that stuff. But anyway, I showed up down there, and turns out that the director, Sean Durkin, was a big wrestling fan. He knew who I was, knew my background. They leaned on me to help them with a lot of the way guys would act and react and move and that kind of thing. The guys I did the scenes with, I'd have been in the ring with. And Chavo Guerrero had done an incredible job of working with the actors and teaching them the basics, and those guys had done an unbelievable job of learning things as fast as they did. So the experience working on the movie was just it was incredible. Just a beautiful experience. Zac Efron was wonderful to work with. He would ask me advice about how Kevin would do this and how Kevin would do that, and I'd tell him, this is what Kevin would do and how he would react, and he would go in there and nail it, and without question, and never none of those guys had that star attitude at all. They all respected what we did in the ring, and they were just very easy to work with. It's just a wonderful experience. The last scene I did was the one with Kevin and Ric Flair, that part toward the end of the movie. And when we finished filming that, which was like an all-day process, really, I got out of the ring and walked around. I was going to tell Sean goodbye because that was my last scene. And walked up to him, and he turned over to the director, the assistant director, and told her to announce that was my route. And she got on the microphone and did that, and there was a big response from all the crew and everybody around there, which was really cool. And I turned to walk off, and Zach had come out of the dressing room, gave me a big hug, and thanked me for helping him. But that's the kind of experience it was. It was really so respectful and so much fun. Making a movie can be boring, I guess, if you're not interested in what the process is. A lot of dead time, but I found it really fascinating, and the product itself, when it all came out, I thought that if you don't look at it from a wrestling historian point of view or a wrestling fan point of view who maybe lived in Dallas or whatever, knew all the details, if you just look at it as a movie, period, I think it was incredible. The acting was first rate. The script was incredible. Yes, there were a lot of things that weren't historically accurate. There were some timelines that were changed. A lot of things were done, just to be able to tell a story in a movie of 147 minutes.
Yeah.
If you got everything exactly right and included all the things people want to see in it, that you see and read and hear talked about, you'd have to have probably an 8-part miniseries. You just can't do it all. But I thought Sean did an incredible job of putting together a great story and a great movie. And if you go in and look at it from that point of view, I think it holds up with anything. I really do. I was disappointed it wasn't nominated for Academy Awards. In fact, I saw an article today from one of the big time reviewers that he said the same thing. He thought that it was kind of a miss for them not to have at least given it some kind of acknowledgments. And it's that good.
It's a small world. I've worked with Luke Hawks all throughout the years, back in XPW and Wrestling Society X, and actually during the days when I worked at Big Vision Entertainment, that was during that Wrestling Society X time. I was one of the got to work on the post production of the Heroes of World Class DVD, at the time. And so I was happy to put my little part into the post production. But yeah, it's a small world, and it's a lot of great guys, and I really enjoyed working on that, and kind of crossing paths with you back then, not directly but indirectly.
Yeah, wrestling is full of great guys. It really is. I've got some of the best friends in my life in this business, and some wonderful people, and some people who are really just so unselfish. And Luke's one of those guys. He didn't have to think about me. He could have gotten some other guy to do something like that, but it's kind of a show of respect, and that was it was something that I'll always treasure and always appreciate. I've been very lucky. I've got a lot of great friends in this business, and had a lot of great experiences, and I've been blessed. I really have.
And you've completely earned your spot too.
Yeah. Oh,
well,
yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you. That means a lot.
And then some. Yeah.
It means a lot, you coming on here and talking to us. We would love to have you on maybe at another time when you're available to do maybe a little roundtable discussion with a couple other referees,
Be happy to. Be happy to do that anytime. Yeah.
I think, there's
you've got my number. Anytime you call and we work out a time, I'll be more than happy to do that. For sure.
Thank you so much. It's truly our honor. Before we leave here, we would like you to plug whatever you have going on and talk about the promotion that you're involved with now.
Well, yeah, I mentioned TSW, Texas Style Wrestling. That's something that I got involved with a few months ago. I just kind of started helping them write their format for their taping and that kind of thing. And then since that time, I've gotten a lot more. They've asked me to get more involved in the booking and the creative side of things. So that's something that I'm really kind of trying to get it to where it not only has that name, but it represents that name, the more believable action type style of wrestling. And we're getting there. We got a lot of good young talent, some good veterans that we're working with. My old friend Jazz and Rodney Mack and Tim Storm are all working with me on that, and we're really proud of where we've come to at this point. And it's still a work in progress, but we're doing well. We're moving into a brand new facility, a real high tech facility this next month. And I'm looking for a lot of good things to happen with TSW. And also, like I said, I'm working with a promotion in Louisiana, which I call a training promotion, a teaching promotion called UWE. Old friend Dan Davis has got that. And he's got about 20 students. And I go down there about once a month and work with them. And they've come a long way in the last 2 or 3 years. And I'm really proud of that. And like I said, I'm still out there here and there. My real passion is also working with the Tragus Fez Hall of Fame. I'm working with those guys and very closely. Jerry Briscoe is the head of that, and that's something I'm very, very proud of. We got our 25th anniversary coming up this summer, July the 18th through the 20th, I believe it is, and in Waterloo, Iowa, at the Dan Gable Museum. And I'd really encourage people to get involved and come to that if they can. It's an unbelievable experience, very intimate. A lot of the stars will be there, and the fans get to up and close, and it's just a fun weekend. And of course I'm still involved with CAC and proud of that. They do a lot of good work. Have helped a lot of people that I know, and a lot of guys who have been down on their luck or had physical or medical issues, and I'm very proud of being a part of that. There's the book. It's been out for a while now. You still get it on Amazon, and I'm finishing up a second book that I'm going to have out this year. So it's been a incredible ride the last 10 or 12 years, especially. I've been in this business for almost 40 years. And well, however that adds up, 37 years, whatever it is. The last 10 or 12 have been unbelievable. You know, the honors and the opportunities and things that have come along that I never expected to have at this point in time. It's been really blessing. You know, and I'm proud of it.
Well, it's like, Dr. Tom Pritchard says, cream always rises to the top. And you're definitely at the top of your game as a referee, and everything helped with behind the scenes. It's been a true honor to have you on, James.
But
It's been
always my pleasure. I enjoy talking to people who love this business and who try to promote it and think about it the right way. And like I said, anytime you ask, I'll be available.
Thank you so much, sir.
Yeah, this is without a doubt very refreshing conversation, and like Eric said, our pleasure having you on. And so fans, once again, the great Jame Beard, one of the greats in professional wrestling, right here on the Wrestling with Reality podcast. For our great guest, Mr. Beard, thank you again. For Eric Malikian, and my name is Chris Kloss. We'll see you next time right here on the Wrestling with Reality podcast. Thank you for joining us.